We do, actually. But if it's quick, you can run out. We're good. I'm not the county attorney, so. All right, we're good to go.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Robert's here. He'll be right back in again. In calling the meeting to order, I'm going to start down here to my right, and everybody do a self-introduction, please.
Yeah, just your mic, thanks.
Ann Hills, Pensacola City Council, District 6.
Dave Peach, Santa Rosa County Commissioner, District 4.
Doug Underhill, County Commissioner, District 2.
Woody Speed, City of Orange Beach.
J.B. Sluter, City Councilman, Gulf Breeze.
And Mr. Bender.
Commissioner Bender, Escambia County.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for being a good host. He brought us all something to drink and made sure everybody was happy and content up here for today's meeting. All right, I'm going to ask at this time for approval of the March 20th, 2019 meetings.
Move that we approve the minutes from March 20th.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any conversation? If not, everybody in accord, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, it passes. At this time, we are going to start our Estuary Program Director interviews. And to get ready for today's interviews, fortunately, I got to leave the TPO meeting a little early, got to Pensacola with all green lights and good flowing traffic, so when I got here, I was trying to decide where I could get some lunch, and thinking, okay, well, we're going to talk about oysters and habitat and our estuaries, so I had clam chowder at Joe Patty's. Much rather would have had oyster stew, but it wasn't on the menu, so. Sorry. All right. Matt?
And I will just say, Dan Dealey is representing Commissioner Gruber today. Commissioner Gruber couldn't be here, so he is his proxy.
All right, Dan, thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. This is a very important meeting today where we're going to select the director for this very important program. So,
Right.
Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very good. So we have both of our applicants here. Jim Trefilio is our first applicant. In the board's packet, you have the application for both, and then on the last page is the ballot. So after we interview and you discuss both applicants, we'll ask you to fill out your ballot. The way I've envisioned the structure working is I will ask 2 standard questions and then open it up to the policy board members for you all to ask any questions you may have, unless there's any other direction from the board.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Commissioner.
What's the process? Are both applicants in the room, or will one be in the room in the back, or?
Right, so this is a public meeting, so they can certainly attend if they wanted to, but right now we only have our current applicant, Jim Trefilio, in the room. And I'll leave it up to him, but I don't know if he's planning to stay or not for Lindsay's interview.
All right. Well, as was stated, it's a public forum. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how, I think I've been in some things before where we've asked that the other applicants not be in the room.
You can certainly ask, yeah, absolutely.
I'll leave that to the direction of the other board members who have more experience in this than I do, but, I mean, of course, you'd be welcome to stay after the fact, but I think prior to.
All right, so Jim is in the room, and he is our first applicant, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, and Mr. Cross is not here at this time?
Miss Cross.
Or Miss Cross, excuse me, I'm sorry. Is Miss Cross here?
No,
She's not.
Okay. Will she be attending?
She will be here for her interview at 1:05.
Okay. All right, well,
Yes,
we're
sir.
good. I have no problem, and This way we've done it in Santa Rosa County is that we do ask that only the applicant be at that interview.
Sure.
And in fact, we don't even stream it because it just gives you a little heads up on the questions that are asked of the previous applicant. So,
Absolutely.
all right. All right.
So
Matt?
if we want to go ahead and let Jim just take a few minutes to introduce himself and tell us about his experience.
All right, Jim, welcome. You have the podium.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just to give you a little bit of background, I have a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, of all things, but more to the point, I have a Master's in Watershed Management as well. I started my career in this type of work back in the late 80s, early 80s, in the flood control district out in Arizona. In that job, we did a lot of large watershed studies. Mainly it was, as you might imagine, flood related, but there were water quality issues involved as well. I started out as a permitter, moved up to a hydrologist position, and then when I left, I was actually a senior hydrologist for that organization. From there, I went to Gainesville to the Estuary County Department of Environmental Protection. I actually was hired as a groundwater expert, moved from that into one of the two program supervisors. It was split between two programs. One was hazardous materials and underground storage tanks. I was the other program supervisor, and that was natural resources program supervisor. That actually dealt with pretty much every environmental issue in the county. We were right in the middle of the development review process, so it had to go through our office as well as all the other offices. We dealt with all kinds of issues. From there, that was during the comprehensive plan process. I don't know if some of you probably remember that when Department of Community Affairs was still a viable entity. That was a pretty difficult time, and there was a lot of work on environmental ordinances that we had to meet deadlines for the DCA requirements. From there, I moved to Pensacola in '93, got a job with Department of Environmental Protection, and probably most germane to this position, I was hired to create what became the Perdido Basin Management Strategies Report. I don't know if some of you may have had a chance to see that. It was in my application package. It essentially is a mini CCMP. It looked at all the existing problems in the basin, environmental problems, recommended solution, recommended actions, recommended funding. So I'm very familiar with Perdido and Pensacola as well, but specifically with Perdido. We worked with an organization at that time, if I remember their title, they don't exist anymore, I don't believe, the Florida-Alabama Water Resources Coordinating Council. So we had monthly meetings, usually over in Foley, Alabama, and we worked through all kinds of things. And again, that ended in a report that had action items that were actionable. But of course, there was no funding available, which is usually the case, and that's always a problem. So that report still is valid, I believe, and I would guess that if you went back and looked at it, you'd find that most of those problems still exist in the watershed today. From there, I had another stint with DEP in their submerged lands program, and then I went to Okaloosa County with their tourist development department, mainly for beach-related issues, but that has morphed over time. Just to give you an example of some of the things we're doing, every year the health department goes out and they look at sampling at different beach locations. They always find hits for enterococcus and fecal coliform. They always have to post signs saying swim at your own risk. They've been doing this for 20 years, and God bless them, that's their mission, but they don't go the next step of trying to solve the problem. So one of the things we're doing is actually using bed tax dollars to look at DNA testing of those fecal coliform samples to see at first break, is it human or non-human? Because there's a big difference as far as danger to humans, whether the fecal coliform they're testing for is human or not human. So those are some of the things we're doing. I also started essentially the Choctawhatchee Bay Estuary program. Was fortunate enough to be able to convince our Board of County Commissioners to contribute over $2 million in their bed tax dollars towards the estuary program. So we do work, I like to think of ourselves as a stealth environmental department in Okaloosa County because we really don't have an environmental department. Escambia is lucky and fortunate to have a very robust environmental department. But over the panhandle, that's a rarity. So we try to do what we can with bed tax dollars. And some of you may recall that a couple sessions ago, the legislature changed what bed tax dollars could be used for. Specifically, the word estuary, or the phrase estuary improvement, is in that legislation. So now bed tax dollars can be used for that, and we're doing that as much as we can. So that's pretty much where I am in a nutshell. There's a lot of details, but that's pretty much it.
Great. Thanks, Jim. My first question is, this position will be responsible for collaborating and building consensus among interested stakeholders utilizing best available science. Can you describe, which you've done a little bit already, your experience in leadership and involvement bringing together stakeholders and elected officials from multiple jurisdictions in a similar type of program? Or
Sure.
situation?
One of the first things we did when we formed the Choctawhatchee Bay Estuary Program was to get community support. And one of the first things we did in that process was to go to the Chambers of Commerce. We were fortunate that particularly Fort Walton Beach Chamber of Commerce was very supportive, and they actually did a lot of the legwork to go out to all the municipalities and to talk to those councils and get their buy-in for the estuary program. Now, when I say buy-in, I mean, it's hard not to like the estuary program because it's not regulatory, and we're not asking anybody for money yet. And that's when the rubber meets the road. But still, we have formal resolutions from all the municipalities in Okaloosa County, the county itself, the other counties that are involved in the watershed, Holmes and Washington and Walton. In fact, Walton County has also committed funding from their Restore dollars to the estuary program as well. And that was all part of this process of getting people into the program in one way or the other. One of the things I kept harping on at the selection committee interviews was that you've got to answer the question, what's in it for me? And that's what we were talking to these potential partners about, was what's in it for you? We even had, we had a ceremonial signing with Eglin Air Force Base as partners for the estuary program. And at the ceremonial signing, the general at the time, I think it was General Azzano, he didn't have to, but after the signing, he went on for 2 or 3 minutes and talked about how important the environmental mission was to the Eglin mission, the Eglin military mission. Those are the kind of discussions you have to have with all of the partners, not just the military, but you have to have them with all the municipalities, with the businesses, with the stakeholders, and you have to answer that question, what's in it for me?
Thanks, Jim. My second question is, the director position will be responsible for developing the Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, the CCMP, which for those that don't know is just a long-term strategic plan which will be used as a roadmap for the restoration and preservation of Pensacola and Perdido watersheds. Can you describe your initial thoughts as to how you would approach establishing the program and developing the CCMP?
So we've got great roadmaps since the 90s. We've got, 28 or 29 national estuary programs. This grant is going to follow that process very closely, because ultimately what I would like to see for not just Pensacola, but all the 3 estuary programs is a national standing. The national programs had they had a foot up, if you will, because to this day they're still getting congressional funding. So they're in a little bit different position than we are. And I think we have to be more proactive to get results quicker than maybe those national estuary programs had to. But to answer your question, I mean, the CCMP, the process is, I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's, like I said, we've got roadmaps. We know how it's done. We know how successful programs have done it in the past, and there's no reason not to follow that. Now, it's going to be unique to our area, but in general, it's going to be the same process. So it's not difficult. It won't, I'm not saying it won't be an arduous task. It will be. But you've got your technical advisory committee. You've got people on that committee that have been involved in this area for, 20 years. I mean, Chips, you were chair of BARC for 21 years. So these people know what they're doing. They've been around, and they're your soldiers. They're the ones that are going to make this happen. The director position is to make sure that they have whatever they need to get that mission done.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to the board for the board's questions.
Open the floor now to questions from board members. Commissioner Peach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question for you, sir, and you asked it already. What's in it for you?
Essentially a dream of a lifetime. I've been in the environmental field on and off for a long time. Somebody asked me at the selection committee review, why am I going for this job instead of Choctawhatchee, which I, helped create? I'm like, this is a regional thing. I mean, you've got one of our commissioners on this policy board because the Yellow River watershed flows into the Pensacola system. We're all in this together. We've had incredible cooperation among the three programs, and that's the important part, and that's what's exciting to me. Whether I get this job or not, I'm still going to support this program. I'm still going to support St. Joe's program. Like I said, it's a dream of a lifetime. It's exciting because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing that, if it's done right, and that's the key, is to do it right. Because if we run out of money in 4 years, I mean, it's no different than the report I did for the Perdido. It's sitting on a shelf someplace, and nobody even remembers it because it was so long ago, even though the issues are still the same. So the key is to make sure that we don't run out of money. And that's a long haul, that's a marathon, that's not a sprint, and it's getting, again, that question answered, what's in it for me, for the stakeholders.
Great, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Thank you, Jim, for being here today, taking the time out of your day to be here, and taking time on the phone during the interview process with the shortlist committee. You've touched a couple of times in passing, but very directly, on one of the key issues, which is funding. Obviously, we have sustained a grant through EPA using restore funds that will get us at least to a CCMP. But you're right, beyond that, it will take quite a bit. And this is not a national estuary program yet, but it is an estuary program. And so, strategically speaking, as you may be aware, the technical committee is teeth out ready to do science. But your position probably is no longer going to be somebody who is doing science. What do you see now? Consider this too. You have Alabama and Florida. Not just Florida, but you've got to deal with a whole different kind of governmental attitude. How do you see your position strategically in working in that funding development world?
I work at the Tourist Development Department in Okaloosa County, and even though I don't do what normal tourist development people do, but I've learned a lot from the sort of the marketing people, just sort of listening into what they're doing. And that's the key. It's marketing. I mean, it's sales. It's what's in it for me. I mean, it's like, and it's individual relationships. You got to go talk to people. You got to go sit down face to face with people and make sure they understand what's going on. And there's so many different approaches. For instance, if you look at public works departments in counties, the civil engineers are pretty conservative. I mean, they do what they do. They've done it for a long time, and they're going to do it the same way because it works. But if you can show them that, hey, if you do this a little bit differently, you're going to enhance the water quality benefits for this stormwater feature more than you would have if you did it this traditional way. And it's not going to cost you any more money. Those are the individual face-to-face relationships you have to have. You have to go talk to the public works directors. You have to go talk to businesses. And they have to trust you. I've worked with lobbyists for years, and what I've found out is that it's the personal relationships they have with the people that they talk to. And that's what's the most important. So to answer your question, it's FaceTime with people. It's getting them to believe what you're doing, that it's going to help them, and it's going to be beneficial not only to them, but to their community, and if they're elected officials, to their constituents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So going into your first marriage, you always have this very beautiful impression about how things are going to be, and I want this and I want that. Going into your second marriage, you always say, here's a list of things I'll never tolerate again. And that's because the experiences, particularly failures, are the things that teach us and formulate us. So I'm going to flip the typical question. You're in the leadership role, and so you have to articulate and drive a vision for those foot soldiers that you've talked about. So we kind of all know really what that vision looks like, right, of a good CCMP and moving on toward being a national. The question, though, and the one that really matters to me is that what do you see as being the impediments to that success that would keep you up at night? Specifically, how do we make sure that at the end of this funding, we don't have yet another Perdido Bay plan sitting on a shelf collecting dust? What are the things that you see, based on your experience, that would trip us up and turn this into yet another one of those things? And how are you going to mitigate those things?
There's no easy answer to it. I mean,
We got time.
I mean, funding is difficult. I mean, everybody wants money. I mean, and I get it. And you have to rank the priorities, but you have to somehow, and I know that's not a particularly good answer, but you have to somehow make the Estuary program something important to the community. I mean, one of the things, back to marketing again, our director she's doing new branding, and she's very clear that branding is not a logo. Branding is an emotional attachment to whatever it is you're trying to sell, in this case, the Estuary program. So you want to have that emotional attachment. How you get to that point, again, it's just communication. It's talking to people, getting them to understand what actually you can do for them, what the program can do for them, and whether that's, a beautiful, storm control structure like Admiral Mason Park or living shorelines. I mean, those things, people love those things. And Pensacola right now in particular, I mean, it's going through an amazing evolution in the way that they're looking at their community. And I think the Estuary program could be a very central part to that. But, as far as funding, I mean, since I've been in Okaloosa County, I brought in an average of about $1 million a year in grants. So I know how to do that. Once you get your Estuary program up and running and solid, you're going to attract money. I mean, and that's never a given. But I'm not answering your question. I understand that. But there's no clear answer to that other than just keeping on doing what you're doing to make sure that people understand what the program is.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
Well, first of all, thanks for being here. Commissioner Underhill kind of swooped in and stole part of my question, but and we've had some discussion about where your vision might be, for the Estuary program in the future, but and we've discussed that during the shortlisting meeting as well. But I do, for the benefit of the board here, I would like you to kind of elaborate on what you see a successful program, an Estuary program, would be at the end of this funding cycle, and
I couldn't hear you, the last part.
what you see a successful Estuary program at the end of the funding cycle, just for the benefit of the board here. As I said, we've discussed it before during the shortlisting meeting, but it'd be good for everyone to hear again.
Well, I think one of the things I mentioned earlier, that I think the national Estuary programs had sort of a foot up, or a security blanket, if you will, with that federal funding. We don't have that luxury. None of the three programs do. And I think one of the things that's going to be really important is to get a pilot project, a successful pilot project in the ground, to show people, to showcase that this is what the Estuary program can do. I don't think we have the luxury of waiting, for 3 years until the CCMP is done. I think we have to do something quicker than that. What that is, I don't know right now. But I think that's a really important part, because then you can highlight it, then you can point to something. You're not just another group doing another study, which everybody and their brother hates. Nobody wants to see studies. They just want to see action. And so the sooner you can do something actionable, then the better off you're going to be. But at the end of 4 years, I would certainly hope to have a consistent funding stream, whether that's coming from the federal government, whether it's coming from the state. I mean, right now, Matt and I were talking earlier, the three Estuary programs have appropriations ask in this session for $500,000 apiece for each of the Estuary programs. It probably won't get funded this session, but it's a marathon. We keep knocking at the door, we keep bringing this up until people understand that this is important. I mean, some of you, if you had seen the the governor's executive order from a few months ago. He tasked Visit Florida, and he tasked the Department of Economic Opportunity to work with local communities on water quality issues. I mean, you can't get a better, partner than the governor to work on some of these things. So, you have to be adaptive. You have to, work with what the conditions are, but you also have to strike when the iron is hot. And right now, the iron is hot. And I think we need to push that as much as possible.
All right. Jim, again, thank you for being here today. My question would be, how soon would you feel you could, if you were at the helm of this, educating the public, and how do you think you could go about that, and what ages do you think would be a good starting point?
You said what ages?
What age, how would you, and how quickly would you?
Well, I mean, one of the positions in the program is an outreach person, and that's a critical position. I think the director position is probably going to do everything that the other people are doing as well, but the outreach person has to start at the schools. I mean, it's right in the wheelhouse of STEM. I mean, why not start there with that age? So, yeah, I mean, it's frankly, it's not an age thing, I don't think. I mean, you really have to, I mean, I don't want to say this again, but what's in it for me? How do you convince these people that this is a worthy program? And that education, whether you're in the schools, whether you're giving talks, whether you're at Earth Day, we should be everywhere. The Estuary program should show up in every meeting that has any kind of environmental hook to it, whether that's the SCAPE thing that's going to be happening at the end of April for Pensacola, or any other, entity or group that's going to be looking at things that are trying to improve the community. And so I'm not answering your question either on this, but it's not so much an age thing, although I think the earlier that you talk to children, the better off you're going to be as far as getting these things as part of your life and not something, oh, we can't afford that, that's a luxury. We have to go pave a dirt road. Well, there needs to be a time when you're starting to balance these things, and I think we're getting closer to that. And like I said about stormwater, if you do it the traditional way, you're not getting the best bang for your buck, but there's other ways of doing it. And it's really that simple. I mean, not easy to do, but simple.
Well, I like your answer, because I think children have more impact on adults or their parents than any literature or any conversation that you and I could have with them.
If I may, I'll tell you a story. Okaloosa County is one of the only counties in the Panhandle that doesn't have a turtle lighting ordinance. We just don't have one. And I've asked a number of times, can I go ahead and start working on that? And, and our elected officials are like, no, it's too much of an issue. So 6 months ago, the Girl Scout troop shows up at a commission meeting, and they asked for, I had nothing to do with this. I swear I haven't. And they asked for a lighting ordinance. And 5-0, the commission passed it, because so I told them I'm bringing the Girl Scouts with me wherever I go from now on when I want something. But you're right. I mean, that's the environment, that's the emotional thing I talked about earlier. It's what's the emotion attached to that thing, in this case, the environment.
All right, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the need for a pilot program. Have you set up any in the past and had any success in that area?
Not in this context. Certainly, we've done a bunch of projects. I mean, we've done construction projects for beach access ways and things, but they're just normal, sort of run-of-the-mill things. Not run-of-the-mill. I mean, they're good. They're valuable to the community, but not in the sense that we try to do something that will highlight and support what the Estuary program will do.
What would you say is you would be most proud of as far as your estuary work?
It being successful. I mean, it's one thing if at the end of 4 years we run out of funding and I'm out of a job, but there's other people that are out of a job as well in that, and that should weigh on anybody. And I don't want that to happen. I mean, I just don't want that to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Jim, one last question. Okay, let's say you're hired. You've got the first 3 months ahead of you, and you get an instantaneous move, okay? So we'll move that, get that out. What do you see as your first few steps that you need to take right out of the chocks?
I meet with everybody. I meet with all of you individually. I meet with all of the commissioners in Escambia County, all of the city council, all one-on-one, to see what, to let them know about it. I guarantee you some of them don't even know about the Estuary program. I meet with all the municipality councils. Yeah, I meet with all the Alabama councils, whoever's in a position, first with the elected officials, to find out what do they want? What do they want out of this? What can I get them out of this estuary program? And just so they know, first off, that there is an estuary program and that we're coming. And, if you want us to help, let us know and we can start working on that. Because we talked about a pilot project earlier, and, in a perfect world, we go after the worst environmental problem first. Well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you have to be flexible enough to say, hey, this community really has a problem with dirt roads. Okay, maybe these dirt roads aren't the worst problem in that particular community, but let's go talk about paving those dirt roads. And we can find beneficial improvements because of that, because we reduce the solids going into the system. But you can't just focus on the science. You have to focus on the reality of the world, of what people expect. And that's how you get support as well. But to answer your question, that would be, I'd be on a road trip, probably for 2 months.
Anybody else?
I don't know if we have Commissioner Bender or Commissioner Boyles on the phone or not. Commissioner Boyles, are you on? Take that as a no. Just want to check with him.
Matt, where do we want to take it from here? We don't-
I do have one more question if the board will let me.
Okay. All right, Matt, I'm going to let you ask the question, then I'm going to give Jim time for a closing remark.
Sure. So Jim, there's a lot of interest in stakeholders from various groups, whether it's the elected officials in Escambia and Santa Rosa and Baldwin counties and the municipalities, or it's state and federal agencies, it's NGOs and just interested citizens. How do you work to listen to all of those concerns and balance them to get a product that we can actually implement?
Yeah, at one of your earlier TAC meetings, you talked about how that group, as good as they are, is just a small microcosm of all these communities around here, that you have to reach out to a much broader audience. So that's the start. That's the first step. Make sure that the people in the room are the people you need in the room. You can't just have the people that are passionately involved in it. There's got to be people that maybe they've never thought about it before. Maybe, yeah, the environment's got troubles, but I've got a business to run. Those are the people you need in the room. And you're never going to get, well, never. You rarely are going to get consensus. I mean, you're going to have people that have their own little issues, and not to make light of it, but everybody cares about what they care about. And so you have to be able to address those, at least in part, to get consent, if not consensus. And it's a process. I mean, it's just, you're never going to reach an end goal. It's not like you're going to get to a point where everybody goes, okay, we're all great. You're going to get to a point where we're okay on this subject, but we're starting all over again on this subject. So it's understanding that people have their needs. Again, you're answering that question, what's in it for me? And you're doing it with a broader audience.
Jim, take a moment and anything you may have want to recap on.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Regardless of what happens, whether you select me or not, I mean, you should be proud of yourselves to be on this board. You should value this as much as you value any association that you're with, because there's an opportunity here that you're not going to see it again. If we screw this up, it's shame on us. And that's true of all the estuary programs in the Panhandle. And again, we don't have the luxury that the national estuary programs have. So I would urge you that, go to impress people. Find a project, trumpet it, use whatever political influence you have. Like I said, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, but we have to sprint a little bit because we've got 4 years. And hopefully within a couple years, you've got funding that can sustain it for longer than that. But, there's an opportunity here. So I will support this policy board as much as I support Choctawhatchee or St. Joe's, St. Andrews. I'm just happy to see that they're in existence. And I wish you all luck, and I wish all the Estuary programs luck.
Jim, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Very good discussion.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, we will have a brief discussion between board members, and I guess we'll recess until the next candidate's
Yeah,
here.
we can do that at 1 o'clock.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
all right. Any discussion want to take place before we recess?
I'm going to reserve my commentary until after.
Commissioner? Bender?
Is there anything else on the agenda that we can cover during this time period, if that's what you so
We-
wish?
We could, if the chairman would allow it.
I would support that.
We have the TAC chair, Jessica Bibsa, is here. Jessica, I don't know if you want to give a brief update from the meeting this morning. And Ken Heck, our vice chair, is here as well. So if you'd like to say anything, please step up.
Hi there, good afternoon. And yes, the technical committee did meet this morning. Didn't know for sure if there would be time to do this, so I actually didn't really gather my thoughts. So I apologize that I'm just going to go off the cuff. But again, the technical committee has been just kind of plugging along. We've been trying to do some of the legwork, some of the groundwork, thinking about the work plan development, kind of setting the stage for the development of the CCMP once the executive director comes on board. So we did spend a fair bit of time going over that. I think at the last time I appeared before you, I mentioned that back in January or February, we had a workshop to kind of start to brainstorm some ideas for developing the work plan. So our excellent staff, again, Matt, did kind of start to flesh out an outline for a work plan. We walked through it today, identified some of the areas, a subcommittee that will then work with the director when they come on board to kind of further flesh this out. But again, the work plan is just to kind of lay out the roadmap for how the CCMP will be developed. So we made some great progress with that. We also had 2 presentations. Christian Wagley, who was on the City of Pensacola Mayor's Transition team, he gave a presentation on, he was the leader of the environmental category for that transition team, and he gave a great presentation on that. And nope, I don't see Christian here. Just, I'll cover a couple of highlights, but at the end of his presentation, the committee discussed that might be something of interest to the policy board to get a presentation from him down the road. But pretty much, I think some of the highlights of his presentation, that cities, again, they kind of were on a little bit of a downslide, but now suddenly they're experiencing a rebirth. It's cool to live in cities again. There's a lot of intersections with the work of the Estuary program. Urban waterways and are often a centerpiece of some of these cities, of some of these landscapes. Locally in the city of Pensacola, as well as in the Pensacola-Perdido watersheds, a lot of improvements have been made to address some of the legacy issues, but it's going to take a while for the resources to bounce back. The fish, the oysters, the seagrasses, it's going to lag a little bit longer, so definitely need to stay attentive to those. Some of the areas where improvements have been made with water quality, with installing baffle boxes, with getting some urban amenities, making stormwater ponds not just a ditch, but something that's actually a community resource, and doing things like road diets, narrowing waterways, putting in more trees. Some of the areas that when he held roundtables talking to members of the community that he heard the most support for were tree protection, making communities more walkable, bikeable, and increasing the use of clean energy. He presented 5 recommendations that he offered to the mayor, and then I think report was generated, and I think come May, I heard was when the next step is going to be to start to visit those. But anyhow, it was a really great presentation, and I think a lot of relevance and intersection to the work of the Estuary program. We also, Ken Heck, who's my co-chair, gave a presentation on the value of seagrasses, speaking about the ecosystem services that they provide, other things that they providing nursery habitat for fish, how they help stabilize sediment, producing food for the web of life in our bays and estuaries. Dolphin Island's Ken Heck and Dolphin Island Sea Lab, they've been working with the Park Service for a number of years, been doing work monitoring trends, doing mapping, and evaluating whether or not seagrass restoration is effective. With certain places, with certain types of species, such as in freshwater habitats where you've got Vallisneria, restoration actually is fairly successful. In saltwater habitats, not so much. Haliduli, which is known as Cuban shoalgrass, that's got about a 50 to 80% success rate, but Thalassia, which is the turtle grass, that's the largest, most productive type of seagrass in our system, it does not do very well with transplanting. In fact, NOAA actually recommends not transplanting the Thalassia, the turtle grass. They recently did a project that was part of the oil spill funding, the NERDA Early Restoration Phase 4, restoring 0.02 acres in the naval live oaks, thank you, section of the National Seashore. And I think that they were looking for about 80% success of the Haliduli transplanting, but it was about 50%, not bad, but again, depends on the species, depends on the conditions. And so whenever evaluating these seagrass restoration projects, it's really site-by-site specific. And again, NOAA recommends conservation of seagrass rather than trying transplanting. We went over dates for a lot of upcoming events. There's Bay Day in Milton coming up, Science Hour.
Jessica,
Is it time?
I have that if you want me to read through it, but.
Good,
it's
okay,
okay.
no, please, then go ahead. That would be much easier than me trying to take my notes. And at our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, May 15th. Hopefully that will coincide with when there's a policy board meeting. And Tracy Goodhart, who is a UF graduate student who did her master's thesis on Carpenter Creek, we're going to get a presentation by her. So, do y'all have any questions on anything the technical committee covered? I guess about half of y'all were there, so. Yeah.
Thank you. Jessica, there's one, actually, it's not something that you covered, but it's something that I think that is a concern that we really need to cover, and that is the protection and restoration of the intertidal zone. All of our rules and regulations that exist, I think, statewide and at the county level seem to be continuing to incentivize hardening seawalls. Mm-hmm. Every time that I have no choice but to vote in favor of giving somebody a hardened seawall, but we actually require in Escambia County a hold harmless agreement because we know what we're doing is harmful to the to the property on either side of it. If you know it's harmful, then you've got to come up with another practice. I think that this technical committee is probably the ideal place to tell people with large mouths and small brains like me, what do we do to change the law so that it incentivizes a waterfront property owner like myself to do away with my hardened seawall and bring back the intertidal zone? If you can help us, if you guys could start to chew on that idea, I mean, I'm just one of us, but I mean, it is something that you could chew on for us and help us get better at, and perhaps create ordinances here at the county level, laws at the state level that make our waterfront property owners our partners in stewardship of that intertidal zone. Thanks.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate that, and I took that as a note. I think once we get the new director on board and move forward with the development of the CCMP, I could see protection of intertidal zone being an important part of that, and maybe giving some guidance for improving the preservation of those habitats. So thank you. Does anyone have any other questions, thoughts?
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, and I just want to quick flip to my co-chair, Ken Heck, who's being distracted by chips at the moment. I'm sorry, no, I just want, Ken,
It
is there
happens to all
anything
of
else
us.
that I checked? I know. Anything else that you wanted to add it? No, I think you did a great job. Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move on now to item number 6 is any public comment?
I do have a couple information items, if you want me to go over that right now.
No, I'm going to open it to public comment.
Okay.
And then you can do that.
Okay, perfect.
We'll entertain anything from public comment other than any discussion about the candidates or previous candidates. Anybody in the public like to speak or address the board? All right. Going once, going twice. All right, Matt, you got the floor.
Thank you, sir. I will provide this in an email to everybody later this afternoon, but there are a few events that I wanted to make note of. Tomorrow, April 11th at 5 o'clock, the Education Committee will meet at the Escambia County Central Office Complex. That's at 3363 West Park Place, and that's Christopher Lindy and Carrie Stevenson and Rick O'Connor are the co-chairs of that committee, so they're doing great work through that effort. Immediately following that, at 6 o'clock, the Science Hour sponsored by UF Extension will take place. Dave Greenwood, who's our Escambia County's Chief of Water Safety, will be presenting on Escambia County's lifeguard program and water safety. April 18th at 9 o'clock is the UWF Student Scholars Symposium. That's going to be at the University Commons building. If you've never been before, that's a great symposium, seeing all the research that the students do in collaboration with the faculty out there. April 22nd at 6 o'clock, SCAPE is coming to town to present the draft Downtown Pensacola Waterfront Plan. So that's an effort between the Studer Community Institute and the City of Pensacola. So that stretches essentially from 3 Mile Bridge all the way over to the Saunders Beach Community Center. May 1st and 2nd, DEP will have their annual Coastal Management Program meeting at the Pensacola Grand Hotel in downtown Pensacola on Gregory Street. That's a meeting that moves around the state, so we're fortunate enough to have it up here this year. I know Chips is presenting on living shorelines, and I'll give a presentation on the Estuary program. So great work coming through that as well, if you can make it. May 10th from 9 to 1 is Santa Rosa County's Bay Day. That's going to be at the Russell Harbor Landing Park. I don't know if Chris is in attendance. I don't see her, but there's a flyer attached. And if you have any more questions, we can certainly get that out to you. So that's my information items, and I will provide this in an email later this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call for about an 8-minute recess. Everybody please be back in the room by 1 o'clock sharp so we can get started with our next candidate.
Yes, sir. It's a test. It's a test, yeah.
That it seemed quiet not being in the chair. All right, let's see, eeny, meeny, miny, because this.
All right, we're going to go ahead and reconvene after a short recess. One other item that we'll take care of, next meeting, May 10th, 2019 at 1:30. Do we have a location for that, or is that big?
I apologize, that's an error. It should be May 15th.
Okay. I was gonna
Wednesday.
ask because I was told different, or heard different earlier.
Right.
So May 15th.
My apologies, and you'll receive a calendar invite sometime in the next week,
Location to be announced?
to be determined.
To
Yes,
be
sir.
determined. Okay.
Chairman, do you need a motion to schedule that?
The whole meeting?
Do we need a motion to schedule the meeting? I don't know that we do.
No, sir.
That's just information item. All right, we are now going to hear from our next applicant. Ms. Cross is here with us now. Matt, I'm going to turn it back over to you for introductions.
Sure. Lindsay, if you want to come up to the podium. Great. Well, Lindsay, thank you for being here. And just to remind everybody of the structure, and is our HR director still here? Is Eric still here? He left, okay. Eric was here, he's our HR director, so if there's any other questions that I can't answer that are human resources related, we'll call him back in. But just to remind everybody of the format, I will ask 2 standard questions, and then we'll turn it over to the policy board members for any questions you all may have. But first, Lindsay, if you want to take some time to just introduce yourself and tell us, some of your experience and previous work history, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And I'm glad I wore my comfy heels today, since I'll be standing. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm really thrilled to be part of this process, and just in the probably short 24 hours that I've been here, can already see so much amazing potential. I can see the investments that you've already put into developing this program, projects that you're doing within the community, using NERDA funds, really taking advantage of some bad things that happened back with the Deepwater Horizon. And I know there's a lot of investment, both from time, from resources, and really just putting your heart into these initiatives. So I want to applaud you on that, and thank you for getting to this point and for inviting me here. It really is an honor. I have a background, I think, that lends itself very well to this position. I think to run a program like this, it takes someone who's courageous, loves to be out working with communities, is good at collaboration, is not afraid to ask for money, understands local and state politics, and of course understands the science. And I think I bring those things to this position. I have a bachelor's in environmental health, a master's in environmental science and policy. I focused my research on industrial stormwater regulations, and actually looked at how we could make some of these regulations less burdensome for industry, because I thought that some things were applied too far just across the board, where there wasn't that individual consideration. I've had nearly 15 years experience with the Tampa Bay Estuary program, and I know it's been a model both nationally and internationally for being able to turn around a very degraded ecosystem and using the support of the community, including municipalities, business, and industry, have really made significant strides. And I know that is a model that you've looked towards, and some real life experience that I would be able to bring to this position. I've also led a nonprofit organization that does conservation advocacy work. It was a bipartisan effort where we worked with legislators around the state to try and secure funding for water and land conservation. And I worked really closely with the conservation community, meaning the people who are out enjoying the resources, whether that's anglers, hunters, people who are taking their families out boating and kayaking. So I understand that there's a lot of interest in keeping these natural resources beautiful here, but also growing our economy in this region, and really starting to become a leader and being able to attract new people to this region. In my current capacity, I work as a conservation advocate, again, looking at the importance of public lands and trying to bridge that gap between kind of the importance of ecology and our economic viability. And I think those are some of the strengths that I bring, that within those roles that required fundraising from grants at the National Estuary Program as the director of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. I sought donations from private foundations, from individual donors and corporations, and recently I ran for the Florida State Senate, and in less than 100 days raised $700,000. So it's never fun to pick up the phone and ask for money or go into someone's office, but it's actually something that I think I've become quite well skilled at, and I know that that's an important component of this program, making sure that it has long-term sustainability, and that means funding. So I'll stop with that.
Great, thank you. So my first question is, the director's position will be responsible for collaborating and building consensus among interested stakeholders, elected officials represented here, and those not in attendance. Can you describe, and you touched on this a little bit already, but your experience in leadership and similar efforts involving those multiple stakeholders and elected officials, getting them at the same table?
Sure. Well, I think the model for the estuary programs is that cooperation between different levels of government, whether it's cities, counties, your water management districts, Department of Environmental Protection. I know there's representation from several of those members here, as well as state agency heads and the federal government. So being able to have conversations that look at the needs of all of those agencies, as well as the significant resources you have in terms of citizen knowledge, groups like the Bream Fishermen's Group that have, decades of research is important to bring to the table, as well as the universities and some of the industry that you have here that also has that local knowledge. So working through the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, I was fortunate to see a model of how that works very well. You have to have a very respectful group that is all looking at how you can invest in things collectively and looking at the health of an entire system. And that means not just the water that you see here in Pensacola, but that means the significant portions of Perdido and Pensacola Bay, which are in Alabama, and people who may not get the chance to see what the direct result of their impacts are. So having that collaborative spirit, I think, is very important. One thing I did at the Florida Wildlife Corridor is to reinstitute our partner summits. That's something that I brought back on an annual basis because I really think it's important to get the different stakeholders together in the room to be able to set goals that are scientifically based, but are addressing the needs of the community. I know that you already have a really great start with that with your application and some of the framework for the work plan, but with a background in stakeholder collaboration, I think that's something that is one of my favorite things to do, and I look forward to doing that here in this region of the state.
Great, thank you. My second question relates to the Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, which, as you know, is a long-term strategic roadmap for restoring and preserving both Pensacola and Perdido watersheds. Can you describe your initial thoughts as to how you would approach establishing the program and developing that CCMP?
I would first lean to the technical expertise that we have. I was able to attend the technical committee meeting this morning. There was already some thoughtful discussion about what's the information that we need to include to develop a CCMP, where are our data gaps. Having a period of record is very important to show that you're not just picking an arbitrary number for water clarity or dissolved oxygen, for example, that it's something that's rooted in science, that is something that is maybe a stretch goal, but that's ultimately attainable. So I would look to the many resources we have, both in terms of the experts and the data we have to begin to look at those goals. But I would also want to have a very thoughtful discussion with different parts of the community and see how those goals mesh with what they want to see. The Tampa Bay program put their goals into things that were more conversational, like we want to be able to see the bottom of the bay. We want to be able to swim in the waters, and I know those are some things that you have, that you want to be, have the best water quality in Northwest Florida. Well, what does that mean? Because it means something different to an angler or a community member. And if you can get to what the root of that is, then you can start to understand what the science and the data needs are, and whether we already have that, or if there's a new emphasis that we need on some of those data pieces. I think equally important is the idea of having the economic and the business metrics and the community engagement. So I think you can't spend enough time getting to know the local stakeholders and people within the watershed, within the 4 counties here, and then in Alabama. So it'll take a lot of effort, but I think it'll be a really, really fun exercise to get to some of those metrics.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, turn it over to the board for questions.
All right, open it to the board for questions, please.
Kind of going the same way. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks
Hi.
for being here. Just a simple question. What's in it for you?
What's in it for me? Well, it's a beautiful day here in Pensacola. I love being outside. I love solving problems. I love creating new things to solve problems. I've taken several leadership training programs because I always want to hone my ability of bringing people together to address issues that are important in the community. And I don't think there's many things that are more important than our natural resources and having healthy places for people to live, work, and play. So I think the opportunity here is to build on a lot of the great history you have and the momentum, but to build something from the ground up and to be able to see a turnaround like we've seen in other estuaries, I think would just be phenomenal to be part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, next question. Commissioner.
You mentioned that you viewed the Tampa Bay project as essentially you have a track record and a pattern, so you know what success looks like, and I absolutely agree with you on that. There's no, that's irrefutable by any rational human being. But I know that you weren't implying that it was really just a rinse, lather, repeat here in Escambia County and Baldwin County. So I would like to know a little bit of what are your thoughts about, this is a very different socioeconomic world than what you're accustomed to in the Tampa-St. Pete area, and it's also a very different political world when you look at Baldwin County, Escambia, Santa Rosa. What do you see as being the impediments to really being able to bring over that awesome track record and apply it here?
Great question. And I don't think you can apply the exact same model that you have in Tampa Bay. I think it shows that there is the ability to bring stakeholders together and turn a system around. The politics and the community in the Tampa Bay region is different. One thing that I was discussing with some people last night is that there usually is a place for regulation, and having some water quality or other metrics that people agree to and are willing to commit their resources towards meeting. So if the climate is adamantly against any regulation or anything that seems a little bit difficult, then I think it would be hard to make significant progress in the short term. With that said, I think there's some of the things that kind of across the board is looking at water quality parameters, looking at the health of the fisheries. Those are things that people gravitate towards that we can measure. So I think a lot of those things we can address here. Understand that a lot of your pollution sources are more legacy, longer term things that may be in the sediments or underground. So that in itself is more difficult than something that you can see, than a pipe that directly discharges into one of the bays. So I think those are things that are going to be more complicated in this system than they are in Tampa Bay.
Okay, if you don't mind, I want to follow up.
Yeah.
I mean, yesterday I went over to Baldwin County to get my Mayhaw jelly when I run out, and literally on the song, there's a song on the radio called Red Dirt Road Livin'. It's built into the culture, that Red Dirt Road concept. How do you, I can give a bunch of other examples, I'm just beating up on my Alabama friends, in that a lot of the things that got us where we are part of are kind of ingrained in our culture. We love to have our waterfront yard look like a golf course right up to the hardened seawall. How do you, for a culture that's so kind of ingrained in those things that got us to here where we are, how do we move that forward?
Well, I think that's part of the discussions you have when you're setting up your metrics and what you want to measure, and having the conversations with people about what is important to you and your family and your community. Is it fishing? Is it access to hunting and recreation? Is it having kind of a prescribed look and feel of a neighborhood? So having those conversations from the beginning are important, and showing that they are part of the solution as much as they may be part of the problem. And I also like listening to country music, so that helps.
Well, it always helps to have a starting point. Thank you for indulging my second question to my peers.
Anybody else? We'll hear now from Alabama.
Lindsay, thank you for taking the time to travel all the way up here and
You're welcome.
And spend some time up here. If I can ask a leading question first, what was the Tampa Bay Estuary Program budget last when you were working on it?
Gosh, I should know this. I think it was around 1.7 million.
Okay, and what was the probable project level scope funding that you were managing?
So how much of that was personnel versus project?
Well, yeah, did you manage projects outside of that budget, or was that?
So I was the environmental science and policy manager there, so I managed probably about $1 million worth of projects every year.
Okay, all right. Right now, Mobile Bay National Estuary Program is working under grants because of the oil spill through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Gulf Environmental Benefit Program, to the tune of a little over $20 million in different projects. And I think that this estuary program is just beginning to understand, because we also, within the different aspects of Florida's governance of the Restore funds and Alabama's governance of the Restore funds, begin to realize that this estuary program could leverage a significant amount of program or project dollars. And in your opening statement, you were very pointed about talking about funding long-term. You're very comfortable talking about science. What do you see as your main role as an executive director for this program?
I think it's helping to guide the vision with the support of the policy board and the various committees that you've outlined. I think it's bringing stakeholders together to creating an atmosphere where you can have dialogue, where you can bring up things like, in our part of the watershed, we do things differently. How are we going to address that collaboratively? I think the role of the director absolutely is to be looking for funding and the long-term health of the organization economically. Also overseeing the science. I've been very strategic about not being a career scientist, because I thought for my personality and where I wanted to go, I thought there was more strength in using the science for management and policy. So I would be looking at bringing the best people onto the staff that could oversee those projects and work within the framework of the NEP, work with all of the excellent folks who are already on the technical committee, and just really bringing the right team members together.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
I know I think I touched on this question during the earlier interviews, but just for the benefit of the policy board, what do you see as a successful program? What are some of the milestones you see, and just for everyone here to be able to hear that from you?
I think some of the successful metrics are, the boring ones that you have to do, like getting the work plan done, the CCMP. You really have to have the right framework before you get out. Like, you need to read your recipe before you start baking the cake. So you have to have staff. You have to develop the framework for the work plan and the CCMP. And I think sometimes it's as much knowing what to leave out of those things as knowing what to put in, because I know there's a lot of energy and excitement around this, and everyone wants to be part of it, and we want to make all these changes, all these improvements. I would actually say that having maybe less at the beginning, and things that you can measure and start to make progress on, even if it's just identifying how you need to better monitor those metrics. So I think those are going to be the markers of a successful program in the first couple years, as well as looking at how to fund this program. And I think there need to be, if you haven't already, conversations with the Association of National Estuary Programs and having a thoughtful discussion about whether this program will become part of that, and if there's a way to grow the pie of funding for that, rather than people thinking that they need to sacrifice some of their funding to support this new program. I know there's some bills that are in the legislature right now that have probably won't see much traction this session, but sometimes it takes several years. So having those conversations early, knowing that in a couple years, this is when we're going to need that funding, knowing the right places to get that from, and building those relationships right now.
All right. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
How did you encourage public engagement as you went through your program?
Well, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program has a Citizens Advisory Committee, and some of those are appointed members from elected officials. And so that group meets quarterly, is quite active in reviewing a program called the mini grants, where they receive revenue from license tags and then return those back to the community. Everyone wants to get a specialty license plate. It's not as easy as it used to be, but I think having some type of small grant program like that does encourage community involvement, because you're all of a sudden not just telling about things, but you're having people working on the ground, giving great project ideas to you. So that's a way to build community and engagement that way.
And did you have education program with it? Did you go into the schools at all, or start people at a young
There was
age?
there was some level of that, doing cleanups or events with schools on a semi-regular basis. I think that early on there needs to be outreach to the community to talk about what this program is and have them feel like they're part of it. But also you can get carried away with doing everything that the schools want you to do, and it kind of becomes something that's kind of beyond the scope of what your staff and volunteers might be able to do. But there's opportunities to kind of create speaker series where you're training people within your citizens group or your education committees to kind of be your spokespeople out in the communities and have those discussions as well.
Sounds good, thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
Okay, let's say you're hired. Let's say you have an instantaneous move and you're living here.
Uh-huh.
All right. Your first 3 months, what are some of have you thought about what your initial steps would be in these first 3 months?
I would want to get out and have individual conversations with the technical committee, with each of you, get to know the area better and see with my own eyes what some of the issues are, set up meetings right away that are more stakeholder engagement meetings, and really start to understand the lay of the land. That's the disadvantage that I have coming here, is that I don't have some of those long-term relationships already, and I think that's important to build that foundation first.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Matt, back to you.
Sure. Just following up on Councilwoman Hill's point, there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of competing interest in the program. So whether that's elected officials that sit here on the policy board, or those that are in Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, Baldwin counties, and all of the municipalities, there's the technical folks and the agencies from federal and state and local government. There's NGOs, and there's just passionate citizens. How do you go about balancing all of those interests and listening to them all, and making sure that their needs get incorporated, but you're basing the program on science?
Bringing communities members together in a shared space, I think, can help to address that, because they may hear that an issue that they have is already being addressed by another organization, or maybe you start to understand how some things are not compatible. And then usually there has to be some type of way to weigh or rank the type of things that you've done. So there's ways to solicit feedback from technical and community stakeholders about what are the key issues that they want to address. But with the understanding that just because your issue isn't what we're doing in the next year or so, it doesn't mean that it's not important, that it won't be addressed, but that it's kind of that hierarchy of needs that, this is what we need first to establish this framework, and then you can start to incorporate other things as you grow staff capacity and so forth.
All right. And just to be fair with everybody, we allowed the other candidate a few moments for a closing remark, so that I'm going to allow you the same.
Closing remark. Can I ask a closing question instead?
It's your moment.
All right. I guess my question would just be how what barriers do you see to this program?
Yeah, I'm hitting that. We have a culture of financial restraint. And when you have a culture of financial restraint, it actually becomes baked into your DNA to find the reasons that you can't. And while, you look around Escambia County, there's a church on every corner. We're all Christians, and yet we all go to different little camps, okay? Success, I'm speaking only for Escambia County, but I think that it may be applicable with the other counties. Success is about bringing together those different existing stovepipes of influence and figuring out a way for this estuary program to become an enabler for the dreams, ambitions, plans, ideas that come from each one of those stovepipes. So I kind of flipped the question to the positive, because in this job you have to stay positive or you'll just end up not getting out of bed. So the impediment, the fear that could cause you to hang up is finding yourself aligned with a stovepipe. Because, as an elected official, I will never, they always ask us at every luncheon to pick out the 50-50 winner and all that kind of thing. I won't ever reach in that hat and pick out the winning card, because whoever you call a winner, you call everybody else a loser. That's a unique, I don't know if it's unique, but it's something that I was surprised about my own community when I became involved in politics here. So the beauty of, and the way that the fear and the impediment would be that if the estuary program becomes a vehicle for any one stovepipe's dreams, ambitions, plans, desires, then you will never be able to pull together the coalition that's required to actually break the paradigm and create a new culture in which the environment is in fact the thing that bonds us all together. It started to sound like a political speech. If so, I apologize.
That was great.
One of the impediments that this program is facing is that it is involving two different states. And while right now that's only two different counties on either side of a body plus other counties in Florida, there are certain, as Commissioner Underhill just mentioned, there are certain cultural attitudes that are slightly different. Making the communication happen, which you have stressed very well, is going to be one of the more difficult things to achieve across these boundaries in a cohesive manner. And keeping that communication out in front of the public. There's no easy way to be in front of the media today unless something negative has happened. But we don't have newspapers for those folks as old as I am who used to read them every day. And so it's pick your news, pick your media. How do you stay in public events? How does the public stay not only engaged, but even aware that you exist? I would venture to say that other than certain interest level groups across the panhandle of Florida, they might not even be aware that there are 3 estuary programs. The Mobile Bay National Estuary Program been in existence for a long time. Very limited outreach per se, although you see them on every event sign related to every environmental activity. So I think that public outreach across these borders to find and maintain good communication is going to be one of the more difficult things to achieve, and you're really going to have to leverage, the program is really going to have to leverage its committees.
I would say it's not so much an impediment as understanding where we're coming from. We went through that oil spill. We saw, pelicans absolutely drenched in oil, fish kill all over the place. When you walked on the beach, your whole bottom of your foot turned black from the oil. There were times, the whole waiting for this thing to come into the Gulf. Is it going to totally destroy the Gulf? I mean, that was an absolute tragedy that we all went through. And this whole thing that we're doing is in reaction to that. It's been a long time coming, but people want clean water. They want clean beaches. They want their fish to live and not have 5 eyes, or, So I would say people will be looking to you for an amazing transformation, and so living up to their expectations might be the worst thing that you'll have to face.
All right. Commissioner?
Still interested?
I'm still standing.
I'm saying, are you still interested
Yeah,
in
course.
tackling all that?
Yeah, of
Okay.
course.
All right, Ms. Cross, well, thank you very much for coming today. We're going to, I guess we'll go into some deliberations and make a decision.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming.
Ms. Cross, how long are you in town?
Saturday, probably.
Okay.
I brought my paddleboard and my tent, so.
Good call. Well
Yeah.
played. You get your vacations where you can.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be working too.
All right, yeah, I'll probably have one of our county staff members reach out to you and give you some scoop on Perdido Key.
Excellent.
While you're here.
And I'm going out with Alabama Coastal Management on Thursday, or Friday morning, to go see Perdido River and some of the pitcher plant bogs.
Outstanding, thank you.
Thanks.
Before we go any further, though, I want to take a moment and thank the Short List Committee for all the work that they put into that, and of course, Matt and staff for the work of getting us this far. I think, how many candidates do we have, Matt, originally?
38.
38. So they had their work cut out for them. So I'm not even going to begin to try to name everybody on that. You know who you were, and thank you very much from this board for all your efforts and work. So, all right, this time I'll open it to the floor for discussion of candidates that we've interviewed. Nobody wants to go there.
Here's my vote.
All right, we've got some that have already turned in. Everybody happy with what we went to? If that's the case, then I'll close the discussion and call for your vote.
See how good I am at counting. All right. Board members, the scores are in. We have 6 for Lindsay Cross and 2 for Jim Trafilio.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we make an offer, that we allow staff to move forward with making an offer to Ms. Cross.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, I'll go with majority vote.
Very good. Yes, sir. We'll work with Escambia County Human Resources to make that offer to Ms. Cross, and we'll keep you apprised if she accepts and her start date, if she does accept.
Is there any other business come before the board today before we adjourn? We've corrected our next meeting date and time and look for the announcement of where that'll be located. So at this time, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.
Mapping? Yeah, so it's just Alabama. I mean, that's all they've done in the past. So we're basically going to repeat what NEP has done. We've been doing a little work in buildings, you know, I don't know, you know, and that was the thought. We might see water clarity improve, and I'm not sure, you know, I'd look at what historical is, but that water's still not clear. There's a lot of storage vegetation.
Well, we also had a couple. Yeah, so we've had some houses there too, but of course they didn't address all this like. So I was looking, still have a lot of sound flow.
Yeah.
But to the extent that moving forward, we know they took their conservative determination.
Right.
There was always
Clearly other things are happening, you know, but I mean, that's a big driver for us. And Mobile and it's different to produce. I mean, water clarity is an issue, but it's not a nutrient issue, it's suspended sediments. That's the issue. If you clear up the water, the vegetation will pull back. So that, in large part, the second part of this is in the upper part of Mobile. So where this valley standard is, salinity matters a lot. And so in a drought year, if you get too salty and you lost the grass, and you're saying, what did you do? You didn't do anything.
Yes, okay, this is really good.
go to the tier 3 option, which is really trying to get at cost and effect. I mean, we can do that, you know, and we're going to do that. But there are some, like the salinity things. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to explain. If you know what the salinity is, you know what the salinity tolerance of those plants are, and once it goes above that and they die, that's pretty, you know, clear explanation. You don't have to do a lot of experimentation on that. And we've seen the same thing in the lower part in the bay. And when you have a drought, the water clarity goes up because of runoff. So that, whatever it is, I think, in my opinion, it's not nutrients. I think it's cosmetics.
No man, that's like me. I like a dirt road living. Like a dirt road living, eating that Mayhaw, eating that Mayhaw, living dirt roads.
Right.
Very, very good.
It's a big one. When we've had drought, we've had root show up all over the place because of water clarity. So there's obviously a seed bank. There's seeds in the sediment waiting for, as soon as you get right, they start germinating and sprouting. If you were to have, I mean, if you were to clear the water up by better watershed management, preventing so much, you know, sediment input, I think you see a lot of submerged vegetation. You know, and you know, that's where the shrimps and the crabs and everybody, I mean, most everybody feels good. You know, a lot of people understand there's a connection between vegetation and the fish. They know that, you know. That it's easy for them. Yeah, more grass is good. I don't think that's an uphill battle. I think that's a yeah.
We're focusing here. Oh, we did
Look, you know, in Chesapeake Bay, I mean, same thing with trying to get farmers to do things differently. And I don't think they've ever really succeeded in that, but it's to plant buffers so that, you know, you don't have sediment going to wind up downstream. I don't know. That, to me, that's, I don't know if Mobile Bay program is working on that. You know?
especially in the early
Right. Right.
We did see the games. We just did still, like, we did one paper and had the right names.
So it couldn't have been better. Right, I know.
And we're going to do the survey this year. And you know, we talked to Roberta, so we're going to go, you know, it's going to be, we're going to go to Beachport. The only issue is that their subcontractors who did the aerial stuff, their price is double from what was done last year. And we told them, I mean, you don't have money for that. I don't even remember the name of, you know, we're going through Beachport. We said, okay, you guys, let's do the same thing we did. Use the same contractor. And I don't remember the name of who did the flight. You know, Vitor did the interpretation, came up with the polygons, and it was came up with Kibo. Right? So, and he came back and said, last time the charge was $29,000. They gave us nothing but $65,000. I mean, you know, I'm saying we can. Yeah.
And so Florida's doing they're all paying these guys.
Right.
And, you know, how many games are you know, how many contractors they're not monopoly on it. So
They might.
efficiencies of saying, you know, hey, let's just pull our resources. And if we are maybe doing a store, raise the priority to say, you know, we're going to be smarter about this for a project to apply. Now, it's
Great.
hard because whether it's, you know.
Yeah, well, that's
But, I mean, because you do it over a space of years, you want whatever it would be, catch it
you know, I mean, they did that after Deepwater Horizon, and they flew the whole northern Gulf, you know, and the conditions were perfect. You can get the northern Gulf. I don't think you can get the entire Gulf.
Well, even especially since we have that part of the
Yeah,
state.
yeah, yep, yep.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
Baseline.
Yeah, and that image, I mean, it's been hard to get at, you know, but that image according to Larry, it's the best they've ever had. The conditions were perfect. You know, whoever, I mean, I guess BP ultimately paid for it, you know. Yeah. Yeah. But I don't think the analysis was ever, you know, because the money wasn't there to do the interpretations.
So I'll never store, what we call the reason why. But the golf course is. So, and I mentioned this in later workshops, it's something that works with money. I mean, you have to get your mouth to the state, so you know, it's usually, concerned about this is one of the things they want to put on the residential plan.
Yeah.
It's got to be that important, because if not, they're going to go out there,
Mississippi won't do it. I think and Florida certainly. Yeah. And Louisiana probably no. Because all they got chandeliers.
well, then that's, anyhow, okay, well, good.
If it was marsh, that's different. That, when we, you know, I was working in Delaware. We're trying to look, chandeliers got oil pretty heavily. So we went to state Louisiana and said, give us the oil information. So said, we don't use seagrass in Louisiana. We didn't marsh in Louisiana. So they had never monitored for it. And that's a huge seagrass habitat. I mean, it's a big area. They had nothing. And that's kind of what they did during that time. They just flew the whole coast.
And honestly, that's how the story goes. You just need 3 votes.
Yeah.
3 states. You get 3 states, it's fine.
That could happen. I don't see why that wouldn't happen.
Well, which makes it conservative for the states too.
My wife makes sure, I do that, but my wife makes sure.
But it is an opportunity, especially in the.
Y'all take care. See you next time. Or if not before, because they have to get this small group together, work on our work plans.
All right. We're going to, glad to see another effort.
Yeah.
What's interesting is we paid for that last time. So you can see the nursery is good.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are going to do the same. I mean, we're going to do more ground truthing. I talked to them about, you know, I never felt good about the ground truthing. We talked to them about, like, well, how did you choose these points? Well, we just kind of knew where we should go, you know. And you can look at their points, and they're all easily accessible. So, I mean, we're going to do that, the tessellated hexagons, and randomly choose sites and go to them. That's what we're going to do.
So when's the schedule?
So, I mean, the flights are supposed to be this summer. And we're going to start with some of the prop car stuff this year. You know, now. And it turns out there's another NOAA grant that TNC got to do signage and stuff. It's the same place we're doing. You know, so we're talking with them. Let's, you know, maybe we can do a little something extra. You know, yeah.
So we did all too. We did 2.
Yeah.
Are y'all going to do that again?
There's not money to do that, you know, and that's what we talked about, you know, be good to do it twice, but I think we're just going to try to do it once. He's retired, like there's retirement lunch for him next week. He's done, yeah, so he's retired, and I think he's moving to Tampa. Consulting company, yeah. But he's retired. And I was talking to Will, and I think he said they're looking to hire, I mean, they never hired Carl's boss, right? Phil Kinsley, he retired. They never replaced him. So they're really short, you know, which is why the Center of Excellence never gotten off the ground. we're still waiting, I mean, we're still limping along, you know, it was supposed to be January, then March, now we're in April. And they keep asking budget questions. Treasury keeps coming out with, well, you said you were going to buy these supplies. What are these supplies? Ziploc bags, I mean, you know. Yeah, well, it's Treasury to Alabama, you know, we're the designated center, but we've been sending it through, you know, the Conservation Department. So it's that Amy Hunter's doing this now among 1,000 other things she's doing. I would not want to be, yeah, and she helped us, she's the one that really got the SAV project together. You know, and again, same kind of detail, so a lot. Yeah. Yeah, it is. They need help. I mean, part of the problem, they don't pay people enough money to get good people, you know. Great, great. They probably raise the insurance, you know, to make up. Yeah.
But I, you know, they did. That's where I work. That's the second in 2 years, and prior to that, it has been like 10.
I mean, you had to get promoted or something. I mean, it's the state people, you know, we're more academic types. I mean, we were able to do stuff because we bring a lot of, I mean, our state appropriation is a small percentage now of our total budget, so we do other things, you know.
So I think that
we didn't look at them.
Mm. I hope this, I hope, I'm thinking if you get the right person like that, you did, that's the key. Yeah. But yeah, if you know you don't have a job in 4 years, that's some incentive.
That's why I said they got to say yes.
I've been positively impressed by the stuff I've seen since I've been dealing with, I mean, that's cool. They're ahead of Mobile in the way they're thinking about climate and what are we going to do and how are we going to deal with this. And yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty impressed. You know, and you know, these people are fervent. I mean, some of them are a little, far out, but there's a lot of pretty knowledgeable people. Yeah.
But I don't see what you're saying, Alice. I can see what you're saying. All right, I guess you can say you went out.
Yeah.
It was so funny when you.
That's good. Yeah.
Nice process.
This is good. I mean, I grew up in Fort Walton Beach. I went to school here. I went to what's called a junior college. I went to the University of West Florida. Graduated from West Florida, way back when. So.
You know, I actually went to Westfield Junior College.
Did you?
A couple of summer classes.
Yeah. I was a baseball player. I was pretty sure I was going to be a professional baseball player.
Wait, when?
I mean, way before you were born.
No,
Probably.
but see, you might know my father.
Maybe.
Clifford Armstrong. He was a baseball player too.
So
Then he went up to Troy after that.
So I played for a couple of years for PJC and it became clear that I wasn't that good. I mean, you keep moving up and everybody's good, and pretty soon, you're a cream of the crop. So I wasn't going any farther